last judge of Israel, Saul, the first king of Israel. And so we will look at the situation there. Let's start with our review questions this morning. Question number 1. Who did Samuel make judges over Israel?
His sons.
His sons, Joel.
Can't pronounce the other one.
Abijah. Joel and Abijah. All right? So I just said Samuel was the last judge of Israel. He was the last faithful judge of Israel. How about that? And it was because of his son's unfaithfulness that the people asked for a king rather than his sons. All right, question number 2. And the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. Number 3, how is Saul described in verse 2 of chapter 9?
Handsome son. There was not a more handsome person than he among the children of Israel. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people.
He was choice and handsome and tall. The most handsome and the tallest of all the children of Israel.
What do you think choice means?
Choice is, what was the, say again?
I've never been called choice or handsome, but I'm wondering what choice means.
I can't remember what the words were in the other versions. I found them.
It means it was in his prime.
There you go, in his prime.
Oh.
Yeah, in his prime. Thank you, Robin. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but yeah, he was basically the best that Israel had to offer in light of their request for a king. That's who most of the men would have chosen if tribal considerations were not a thing. All right. Okay, number 4. What tribe was Saul from? Benjamin, which was the smallest tribe in Israel. All right, number 5, how long was Saul to wait at Gilgal for Samuel to come offer burnt offering sacrifices and peace offerings? 7 days. Number 6, when Saul was identified as king, what did the people shout? Long live the king. Number 7, who encamped against Jabesh Gilead? Nahash the Ammonite. Number 8, what happened to the Ammonites who survived?
Scattered.
They were scattered. There were no 2 of them left together. So they all went in different directions and they all went alone. All right. Number 9, what was the great wickedness done by the people?
It was done in the sight of the Lord in asking a king for yourself.
Asking a king for themselves. This was considered wickedness. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment as well. Number 10, what would Samuel continue to teach? The good and right way. He would continue to teach the good and right way. All right. Any questions over our reading portion? Let's flip over to our discussion side, and remember, these are the longer discussions, so if you've got a comment, please raise your hand so that a mic can be brought to you. Number 1, what was wrong with the Israelites' request for a king? We noticed in chapter 12 it was considered wickedness. What made it wicked?
They rejected God.
We'll start with Kay and Robin, and then we'll go back to Mary.
It constituted a rejection of God as the direct king and ruler. They wanted a king like the other nations, a human leader for military strength instead of trusting God's protection. And the request showed a lack of faith.
Yeah. Okay. Robin?
I think what started it is they looked at the other nations, and they all had kings, and they liked that idea. They didn't realize what they were asking for. And then, as they did it, God said, "You've rejected me. If you want a king, I am your king." So.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Mary, Roger will bring the microphone back to you.
I was only saying that they rejected God,
Yeah.
and that's what made it evil for asking for the king. However, why did they think a king would keep them on the straight and narrow way if the spokesman for God hadn't kept them there? It's up to
Right.
them, not somebody telling them what to do.
Yeah. I think they were looking to pass the buck maybe to somebody else. Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, even today, I mean, they're just similar to what we are today. They see somebody else that has something that they don't.
Yeah.
Well, they wanted kings like the other nations. They wanted to be like the other nations. They wasn't worried about God. They wasn't thinking about God, and they wasn't putting God first in their lives because they thought they would be able to get all the things that they needed if they had kings like the other nations.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you all hit it pretty well. Now, God had long ago given them instructions regarding the selection of a king. Back in Deuteronomy, during the books of Moses, Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 14 and 15, he says, "When you come to the land which the Lord your God has given you, and possess it and dwell in it, and say, I will set a king over me like the nations that are around me, you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. One from among your brethren you shall set a king over you." So again, what's wrong with it? If God predicted it, what's wrong with it? And I think you all kind of hit the nail on the head. The people seemed more concerned with what they wanted rather than what God wanted. Those who were familiar with the scriptures, they would have known that God had spoken of a king for the nation. But they would have also known that he had not given any sort of timeline for a monarchy in that prediction. We have no record of the people approaching God through Samuel, inquiring if this was the right time for a king. They simply said, "Give us a king. We decide that it's the right time." When we make any decisions in this life, especially a major decision like this, we should consult God. Pray to him, search his word for his will. Should I take this job? Should I vote for this person? Should I move to this city? If we fail to consult God when we have these questions, we fail. We need to look for his will in all things. Second, their request was wrong because they were more concerned about being like the other nations, like several have said this morning. Deuteronomy 7:6, God told them, "You are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth." But that wasn't good enough for them. They wanted to be like everybody else, and they demonstrated their disregard for God's opinion of them with their chronic apostasy. They would come back to him, then they'd fall away again. They'd come back to him, then they'd fall away again. It was a vicious cycle. The Lord said that they have forsaken me and served other gods in chapter 8, verse 8. They failed to see themselves the way that God saw them. And that led them to turning their back on the only true God. Too many Christians are the same way. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, Peter says, "You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." Yet that's not good enough. Friends, there is no higher calling than to be a faithful child of God. And that includes nonconformity with the world. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Don't go chasing after the things that this world values. Seek those things that have an eternal value. And then finally, it reflected a lack of trust in God, a lack of faith, like what Kay said, for him to take care of them. He had supplied their needs in the past. He had promised to do so in the future. Whatever kind of leader was needed, whether it was a prophet, judge, priest, or king, God would raise up that individual at the right time. But the people were not willing to leave the future in God's hands. They wanted a king, and they wanted a king now. Any other thoughts on number 1? All right, question number 2. God warned the people about the abuse of power that a king would exert. Where do we see those abuses occur later in Israel's history? Give some examples here. Robin?
I just want to read Hosea chapter 13, verses 10 and 11. He said, this is talking about God, "I will be your king, where is any other? That he may save you in all your cities, and your judges to whom you said, 'Give me a king and princes.' I gave you a king in my anger, and took him away in my wrath." And as I did some research, found out that most of Israel's kings were not obedient to God. Most of them led the Israelites into idolatry. But there was about 10 that were considered good. And I think Hezekiah was probably the best of the 10. But there were at least 27 that were bad.
Yeah.
Some were really bad.
Yeah.
That's what I can remember.
There was a mixed bag when it came to their commitment to God. Yeah. What else you have? Thomas?
Following up on what Robin just read about the kings and said about them, we find that King Saul's slaughter of the priest in 1 Samuel 22, 17 and 19. And number 2, King David used his authority to take Bathsheba in 2 Samuel 2. And then the third thing, King Ahab, theft and judicial murder influenced by his wife Jezebel in 1 King 21. And fourth, King Solomon, exploitation and idolatry imposed heavy takes and forced labor on his own people in 1 Kings 11 and 12. And 5, King Jeroboam leads the nation into idolatry in 1 Kings of the northern kingdom of Israel in 1 Kings 12, 25, and 33. And then King Rehoboam, Solomon's son, he rejected the advice of his elders and pledged to treat his subject harsher than his father. This caused a revolt and a split in that nation in 1 Kings 12.
Yeah. All of these warnings that Samuel gives in chapter 8, we see them all play out. God's not wrong on anything, right? If he says it's going to happen, we can be sure it's going to happen.
Even before the end of the fall of Saul,
Sure.
Saul implemented everything that they were warned about.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly where it started, but it is in Samuel, 1 Samuel, and he did exactly what they were warned about.
Right, right. Now, I broke it down with each of the warnings that we find in verses 11 through 17. You've got the conscription. We see it, and this is in Saul's reign. There was a fierce war with the Philistines all the days of Saul, and if Saul saw any strong man or any valiant man, he took him for himself. You're going to be in the army. You don't have a choice in it. The king said so, right? Forced labor. We see this We see this later in Solomon, where it's specifically noted he was noted for his massive labor force in 1 Kings 5:13, and later on Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel called it a heavy yoke. The seizure of daughters. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, bakers. We read of the massive consumption of food in Solomon's day in 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 22 through 23. And they were daily consumption intakes. You got to have people to be able to make the food for it to be consumed in those quantities. Confiscation of property. He'll take the best of your fields, your vineyards, your olive groves, and give them to his servants. And we see this later, 1 Kings chapter 21. Ahab took the the vineyard of Naboth after Naboth refused to sell it. And Ahab had him falsely accused and executed to finalize the confiscation of that property. Taxation. God condemned this practice through the prophet Amos. Amos chapter 5, verse 11, therefore, because you tread down the poor and take grain taxes from him, though you have built houses of hewn stone, yet you shall not dwell in them. You have planted pleasant vineyards, but you shall not drink wine from them. We also read of the taxation of the rich in 1 Kings chapter 5, in verses 19 through 20. Pul, king of Assyria, came against the land, and Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver that his hand might be with him to strengthen the kingdom under his control. And Menahem exacted the money from Israel, from the very wealthy, from each man 50 shekels of silver to give to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria turned back and did not stay there with the land. And in the enslavement, again, we refer to 1 Kings chapter 5, verse 13, Solomon's 30,000 man labor force. God said it's going to happen, and it happened. And it happened, and that's just one example of each. Other examples could be noted. But God said, you don't want this. People said, yeah, we do. God said, be careful what you ask for. All right, number 3. What obstacles did Saul need to overcome in ascending to the throne? Robin and then Kay.
Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin, which was the least of all the tribes. So because of that, he had to convince the people to accept him. Mm-hmm. He also had to figure out how to be a good king. They never had a king, and he really didn't know. Of course, Samuel gave him direction, but he ignored that a lot. But early on, he was shy. So I think he had to be urged to do things. But later in life, he became arrogant, and he never got over that. And he made many, many, many mistakes as a king.
Yeah, that's right. You'll pass it down to Kay.
1 Samuel 10, 21 and 22, it was talking about his personal insecurity, and he was hesitant and hid among the baggage. 1 Samuel 10, 27, he faced scoundrels and the opposition of those who doubted his ability to lead. There was tension involved in the act of establishing a human kingship, rejecting God's rule. And then 1 Samuel 11:11, unifying the tribes to provide a prompt and successful, can't read my own writing. response against the Ammonites, the military response against the Ammonites.
Take that part and change that battery out. Okay.
So we remember the description of Saul when he was first introduced. The inspired writer calls him choice, handsome, the most handsome in all the land. He was the tallest. He was in the prime of life, like Robin said. He was a shining example of the type of leader the Israelites wanted so that they could be like all the nations. But how did Saul see himself? Chapter 9, verse 21, Saul answered and said, "Am I not a Benjamite? Of the smallest of all the tribes of Israel, my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin. Why then do you speak to me like this?" He knew what Samuel was asking of him. And he said, "I'm not the guy you're looking for." Saul exhibited humility in this conversation with Samuel. Now, when we see his attitude later on in his life, there are some who doubt that he was sincere in this humility. There are others who claim this could have just been the etiquette of the day. You refuse a compliment. You don't want to put yourself on a pedestal. Plug this back in so I can stop shouting. All right, how's that? Now I can stop shouting. All right, so he didn't want to put himself on the pedestal. Taking it at face value, his opinion of himself was his first obstacle. Do we ever face this same obstacle as we serve God? This idea of I'm not good enough. I think most of us deal with this at some point to some degree, and perhaps more often than we would like to admit. We should not boast about ourselves. But that does not mean we should not make an honest assessment of the abilities that God has blessed us with and use them to His glory. Romans chapter 12 and verse 3 says, through the grace given to me, Paul says, for I say through the grace given to me to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. This does not say, don't think of yourself highly. It says, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. Be honest with the abilities that God has given you. Be honest with the position that God has put you in. Don't think that you are better than you are, but don't think of yourself too lowly either. Use what God has given you in your service to Him. There's also the obstacle of public acceptance. Even though the people requested a king, there was hardly unity among the tribes. Any choice would likely be rejected by a large portion of them. You've got the two biggest tribes. Well, who are you going to choose a king from? If you choose a king from Judah, Ephraim's going to get upset. If you choose a king from Ephraim, Judah's going to get upset, right? You choose a king from Benjamin, the smallest tribe, everybody else is going to get upset. It hasn't been that long since a savage civil war occurred against Benjamin. In the days of Jephthah, the tribes fought, the Transjordanic tribes fought the tribe of Ephraim with over 40,000 casualties of the Ephraimites. As it was pointed out, the last verse of chapter 10 shows that Saul did not have unanimous support. Some rebels or scoundrels said, "How can this man save us?" So they despised him and brought him no presents, but he held his peace. Where did Saul go after he was anointed? In verse 26, he went home. He didn't go to the throne, he went home. The public acceptance was not there for him yet. Saul's leadership is tested in 1 Samuel 11, his defeat of the Ammonites. He showed himself worthy to be king from the military standpoint. Not only that, he showed graciousness in refusing to execute those rebels who had opposed him in the previous chapter. And then Samuel said to the people in verses 14 and 15, "Come, let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there." So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they made sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. So there were some obstacles for Saul to overcome, both personal and national obstacles. Through Samuel's guidance, through God's guidance, Saul was able to achieve that acceptance. Now, he squandered it later. We'll read more about that next week and in following weeks. But there initially, there was that humility that he had to overcome. We talk about the need to be humble. We've got to remember God has put us where we are. He has given us the abilities that we have. Be humble all you want, but you better be using the opportunities that God gives you. All right. Any other thoughts on question number 3? Comments?
I have just one other thought. There was a pressure to perform. He struggled with prioritizing human approval and fear of the people over abundance to God's command. And I think we struggle with those things as well today. As we read God's word and as we're taught the things that God has commanded us to do. He's commanded us to go. He's commanded us to make disciples. He's commanded us to do a lot of things. And I think most of us feel inadequate in doing those things that he wants us to do, and therefore we struggle with them from time to time.
Yeah, there are definite struggles there. We're pulled in both directions, aren't we? We want to please God, but we don't want to upset the people. And we want to please people, but we don't want to upset God. And we've got to make some hard decisions sometimes. All right. Any other thoughts? All right. Number 4. We got a history lesson. Where in Scripture are the events mentioned by Samuel in chapter 12, verses 6 through 12 recorded?
I'll start.
Okay.
Verse 8 and 12 is, you refer to Genesis 46, 5 and 6, where Jacob and his family moved to Egypt. Also in 8 refers to Exodus 12, verses 33 through 37. Moses led the people out of Egypt. And 12:9 refers to Judges 4, 1 through 4, where they were sold into the hand of Sisera, however you pronounce that. 12:10, back to Judges chapter 3, 7 through 11, where they served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. And 12:11 refers to Judges 11, where they were delivered out of the hands of their enemies. And verse 12 refers to 1 Samuel 11, where they were saved from Nahash, from taking them over by Saul and Samuel.
Okay. What else you got?
I had Exodus 3 and 14, verses 6 through 8, appointment of Moses and Aaron, Exodus from Egypt, and Exodus 3, verses 9, oppression by the Syria and the Philistines, Judges 4, 2 and 3, and Moab in Exodus 3 and 9, Philistine, Judges 10 and 7, and thirdly, the people cried out and confessed, Judges 3 and 9, 10 and 10, 1 Samuel 7 and 3 through 4, and Michael 6 and 4, and then fourthly, Judges sent by the Lord in verse 1, Judges 6 and 8, Psalms 106, and Nehemiah 9.
Okay. Any others? I think you all pretty much hit everything I had. The deliverance from Egypt in Exodus chapters 3 through 14, Jacob going to Egypt, Genesis 46, settlement in Canaan. We see that throughout the book of Joshua. The oppression by Sisera is in Judges 4:2, the Philistines, Judges chapters 3, 10, and 13, and then Moab, Judges chapter 3. You've got the deliverance by the judges, Jerubbaal or Gideon, Judges 6 through 8. Bedan or Barak, Judges 4 and 5. And Jephthah, Judges 11 through 12. And then Samuel, we've got him here in the first several chapters of 1 Samuel. And then their request for a king. We see it in 1 Samuel chapter 8 and going forward. So Samuel takes it all the way back to Genesis and brings it up to where they're at presently. All right. Any that have been missed, anything that Robin and Thomas and I did not cover. All right, final question. What qualities of godly leadership are evidenced in chapter 12? Robin.
Okay, all the godly leadership I saw came from Samuel.
Yes.
Samuel gave God the glory for picking Saul as king. Samuel showed honesty and integrity during his judgeship. Samuel pointed out to the people of their sin and demanding a king. Samuel continued to use the people to fear the Lord and remain obedient. And Samuel reassured the people of God's continued love and protection if they remain faithful.
Okay. What else?
Key qualities are focused on God's sovereignty, courageous truth-telling, fervent intercessions, and mentorship. And secondly, praying for people, promising to continuing teaching them the good and right way, despite stepping back from direct leadership. Dependence on God's power, grace, and service in transition. Focus on covenant, faith, fullness, confronting sin, and committed to the serving the people through prayer and the teachings of God.
There's that continued commitment, right? You have to be committed to doing what is right and to being right with God in order to be a godly leader. Right? Any other thoughts? All right, we see the integrity in verse 4. Samuel points out that he has not taken a bribe, he hasn't cheated, and the people affirm this. You haven't cheated us or oppressed us, nor have you taken anything from any man's hand. A man may have many qualities of good leadership, but if it is proven that he is dishonest, his followers will soon desert him. Sadly, we see in the case of Samuel, it doesn't matter if you are godly even then. Some of the people will turn their backs on you. Samuel was a man who put his trust in the Lord, He reminded his listeners how God had blessed and helped them and the entire nation in the past. The common thread in Samuel's historical survey is the need for the Lord and for his protection. And we need to remember that that promise of God remains today. If we are faithful, he is faithful to us. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. The people in Samuel's day had turned their backs on God. They were not content with what they had. They were looking for something different, and they didn't accept the fact that God had them, that God was going to be there for them. And then finally being obedient to God. Many other qualities of effectual spiritual leadership could be mentioned, but in the remainder of Samuel's discourse, he concentrated on the most important attribute, and that is the need to obey God in all things. Those who desire salvation must submit to God. Disobedience is a sure path to condemnation and hell. Jesus is the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Hebrews 5:9. We can't get around the fact that obedience is necessary. Yes, God is gracious. Yes, God is merciful. But if we rebel against him, forget it. We have to submit to him. All right. Any other thoughts, David? Do you have something?
Yeah, not specifically about this, just overall.
Okay.
Excuse me. This is the first time that Israel rejected God as king. The second was when they said, no, Jesus is not our king. We are, and they rejected him then. But one thing that interests me, and I don't know if it matters, but in 1 Samuel 12, starting in 14, if you fear the Lord and serve and obey him and do not rebel against his commands, and if both you and the king who reigns over you follow the Lord your God, good. But if you do not obey the Lord, and if you rebel against his commands, his hand will be against you, and it was against your fathers. So it was incumbent upon the king to also obey the commands and fear the Lord, not just the people. So
Right.
now they were, they went as the king went.
Yeah.
And the king that they had to begin with was always righteous. Always, always, always. And they didn't have to worry about that. But now they needed to worry about the king and how he viewed things. And we know how that turned out. We discussed,
Right. Yeah, Robin mentioned, there very few of the kings were actually faithful. They were actually, most of them, the tagline in the books is, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord, right? Very few was it said he did good. So, yeah, leadership is important. Leadership in the church is important. We've got to have good elders. We've got to have righteous elders that meet all the qualities of 1 Timothy chapter 3. And I'm so glad that we've got two good men serving in that role here. I've seen it where that's not the case. And it's harmful to the entire congregation. So it's important to have good, godly men leading, overseeing what's going on in the congregation, just as it was important for them to have a good, godly king to oversee the matters of the nation. All right, any final thoughts here? All right, next week, we're going to talk about the successes and failures of Saul. 1 Samuel chapters 13 through 15. If you did not get a paper, they are up here on the front pew. Thank you all for your attention this morning.